The 14th Voyage. 1908. Having my rocket repaired. I got too close to the sun last time. All the finish peeled off. The shop manager suggests green. Perhaps. I don't know. Spent the morning straightening up my collection. The prettiest gargoon pelt was full of moths. Sprinkled it with naphthalene. My afternoon at Tarantoga's. We sang Martian songs. I borrowed from him Brizard's 2 Years Among the Squamp and Octopuckles. Read it till dawn. Simply fascinating. 28. I agreed to green. The manager is trying to talk me into buying an electrical brain. He has an extra one in good condition, hardly used, high-powered. He says that no one goes anywhere today without a brain, except maybe to the moon. Haven't decided yet. It's a big expense. Read Brizard all afternoon. Can't put it down. And to think that I've never even seen a squamp. 21-8. At the shipyard, bright and early. The manager showed me his brain. Truly handsome. And the joke battery lasts 5 years. This is supposed to solve the problem of cosmic ennui. You'll laugh the whole voyage, said the manager. When the battery runs out, simply put in another. I ordered the rudders painted red. But as for the brain, I'll have to think about it. Stayed up till midnight reading Brizard. Why not go hunting myself? 22-8. I finally bought that brain. Had it built into the wall. The manager added on some optionals, a heating pad and pillow. Taking me for all I'm worth. But he says I'll save a lot of money. The point is that when you land on a planet, you usually have to go through customs. With a brain, however, you can leave the rocket in space, let it circle the planet like an artificial moon, and then, without paying a single cent on duty, you proceed the rest of the way on foot. The brain computes the astronomical elements of its flight and relays the coordinates when you have to find the rocket later. I finished Brizard. Pretty well made up my mind. I'm going to Enopia. 23-8. Got the rocket from the repair shop. It looks beautiful, except that the rudders clash. I repainted them myself, yellow. Worlds better. Borrowed Volume E of the Cosmic Encyclopedia from Tarantoga and copied down the entry on Enopia. Here it is. Enopia, 6th planet of a double, red and blue, star in the Calf constellation. 8 continents, 2 oceans, 167 active volcanoes, 1 Torg, see Torg. A 20-hour day, warm climate, conditions for life favorable except during the wackers, see wacker. Inhabitants. A. Dominant race. The Ardrites. Intelligent beings, polydiaphanohedral, non-bisymmetrical, and pelisobrachial. 3. Belonging to the genus Siliconoidea, order Polytheria, class Luminifera. Like all Polytheria, the Ardrites are subject to periodic discretional splitting. They form families of the spherical type. System of government, gridocracy, 2B, with the introduction 340 years ago of penitential trasm, see trasm. Industry highly developed, principally eating utensils. Chief items of export, phosphorescent manubria, heart PLs, and loppets in several dozen varieties, ribbed and tannable. Capital, Abadub. Population, 1,400,000. Industrial centers, Hauper, Drur, Arbagalar. Culture, luminositas, showing tendency to mushroom due to the pervasive influence of the relics of a civilization wiped out by the Ardrites, the Phytogosian, see mushroom men. In recent years, an increasingly imp role has been played in the cultural life of the society by, see, scrupts. Beliefs. The prevailing religion, monomungism. According to M., the world was created by the multiple munge in the person of the original Erdl, from whom arose the suns and planets, with Enopia at the head. The plated temples of the Ardrites are stationary and collapsible. Besides monomungism, several sects are active, the most significant, the Tentortonian. The C. Tentortonians believe only in emphosis, see emphosis, and some not even in that. Art, ballet, rotary, radio opera, scruption, antediluvian drama. Architecture, in con with the wackers, pump inflatable tubulus blobiform. Dumb towers, highest are the 130 deckers. On art moons, edifices generally ovoid. B. Animals. Fauna of the siliconoidal ver, prince species, slebs, autachial dendrifnifts, grunchians, squamp, and whimpering octopuckles. During the wackers, the hunting of squamp and octopuckles is prohibited by law. For man, these animals are inedible, with the exception of squamp, and only in the Zarf region, see Zarf. Aquatic fauna constitute the raw material of the food industry. Prince species Infernalia, hellwinders, chungheads, frincuses, and opthropulares. Unique to Enopia is the Torg, with its bollical fauna and flora. In our galaxy, the only things analogous to it are the high-eye in the frothless sump bosks of Jupiter. All life on Enopia evolved, as has been shown by the studies of the school of Professor Tarantoga, within the confines of the Torg, from the calcyclidine deposits. In con with the massive devel of land and sea, one can expect the swift disappearance of the remnants of the Torg. Falling under Pair 6 of the Stat in Re, the Preservation of Planetary Monuments, Codex Galacticus T MDDDVII, Vol XXXII, page 4670, the Torg has been declared a park. Esp forbidden is poaching, croaching, at night. Most of the entry is clear to me, except for the references to scrupts, tresem, and wackers. Unfortunately, the last volume of the encyclopedia published so far ends on succotash, which means there's nothing about tresem or wacker. However, I did go over to Tarantoga's to look up scrupts. All I found was scrupts, a feature of the civilization of the C. Ardrites of the planet C. Enopia, plays a significant role in their cultural life. See scrupture. I followed this advice and read, Scrupture, the act of scrupturing, the state of being scruptured, the product of C. Scruption. I looked under scruption, which said, Scruption, an activity or condition of the C. Ardrites of the planet C. Enopia, C. Scrupts. The circle had closed. There was nowhere else to look. Well, I'd sooner die than admit to such ignorance in front of the professor, and there's no one but him I can turn to. Anyway, the die is cast. I've decided to go to Enopia. I take off in 3 days. 28-8. Started out at 2, right after lunch. Didn't bring along any books, since I have that new brain. It told anecdotes all the way to the moon. I laughed and laughed. Then supper and off to bed. 29-8. I must have caught a cold in the moon's shadow. I keep sneezing. Took 2 aspirin. 3 freighters from Pluto on our course. The engineer telegraphed me to get out of the way. I asked what his cargo was, thinking it might be God knows what, but nothing, just ordinary clapper. And then an express from Mars, terribly packed. I looked out the window. They were all lying one on top of the other, like herring. We waved our handkerchiefs, but they were already gone. Listened to jokes until supper. Hysterical, only I keep sneezing. 38. Increased the speed. The brain working perfectly. My sides began to hurt some, so I turned it off for a couple of hours and plugged in the pad and pillow. Feels wonderful. It was after 2 when I picked up the radio signal Popov sent from Earth in the year 1896. I'm a good ways out now. 31-8. The sun is barely visible. A walk around the rocket before lunch to get the circulation going. Jokes until evening, most of them old. It looks as if that shop manager gave the brain some back issues of a humor magazine to read, then threw in a few new jokes on top. I forgot the potatoes I'd put in the automatic pile, and now they're burnt, all of them. 32-8. Because of the velocity, time is slowing down. This ought to be October, but here it is, still August. Something's started flashing by outside. I thought it was the Milky Way already, but no, just my paint flaking off. Damn, a cheap brand. There's a service station up ahead. Wonder if it's worth stopping. 33-8. Still August. After lunch, I pulled over to the station. It stands on a small, absolutely empty planet. The building looks abandoned, not a living soul about. Took my bucket and went to see if they had any paint here. I was walking around when I heard a puffing. I followed it, and there behind the building saw several steam robots standing and conversing. I drew near. One of them was saying, "Surely it's obvious the clouds are the astral bodies of steam robots that have passed on. The basic question, as I see it, is this: which came first, the steam or the robot? I maintain it was the steam." "Hush, shameless idealist," hissed another. I tried asking for paint, but they were hissing and whistling so much I couldn't hear myself think. Dropped a complaint in the suggestion box and continued on my way. 34-8. Will this August never end? Washed the rocket all morning, bored stiff. Climbed inside to try the brain. Instead of laughter, such an attack of yawning that I feared for my jaw. A tiny planet starboard. Passing it, I noticed some sort of white dots. Through the binoculars, observed that these were little signs with the inscription, "Don't lean out." Something's wrong with the brain. It's swallowing its punchlines. 1:10. Had to stop on Stroglon, out of fuel. In braking, the momentum carried me through all of September. Considerable congestion at the airport. I left the rocket in space so as to avoid having to pay duty. Took only my fuel cans. But first I computed, with the help of the brain, the coordinates of my elliptical orbit. Returned an hour later with full containers, but not a trace of the rocket. Obviously, I had to go look for it. Shuddered at the thought, but covered something like 4,000 miles on foot. The brain made a mistake, of course. I'll have to have a little talk with that shop manager when I get back. 2:10. My velocity is so great the stars have turned into fiery streaks, as if someone were waving 1,000,000 lighted cigarettes in a dark room. The brain stutters. What's worse, the switch is broken and I can't turn it off. Rambles on and on. 3:10. It's running down, I think. Spells everything out now. I'm gradually growing accustomed to that. I sit outside as much as possible, only with my feet in the rocket, for it's cold as hell. 7:10. At 11:30 reached the Enopia terminal, the rocket red-hot from braking. I parked it on the upper level of the artificial moon, their port of entry, and went inside to take care of the formalities. An unbelievable crowd in the spiral hallway, arrivals from every corner of the galaxy, walking, flowing, hopping from counter to counter. I got into line behind a pale blue Algolian who, in polite pantomime, cautioned me not to stand too close to his posterior electrifying organ. Then suddenly behind me there was a young Saturnile in a beige kabong. With 3 chutes he held his luggage, with the 4th chute mopped his brow. It was indeed hot in there. When my turn came, the official, an Ardrite as transparent as glass, looked me over carefully, greened a little — the Ardrites express emotions by changing color. Green is equivalent to a smile — and asked, "Vertebrate?" "Yes." "Amphibious?" "No, only land." "Thank you, good. Mixed diet?" "Yes." "From what planet, may I ask?" "From Earth." "And now please go to the next window." I went to the next window and, looking in, confronted the very same official, or more exactly, his continuation. He was turning the pages of an enormous book. "Ah, there it is," he said. "Earth. Yes, very good. Are you here on business or only touring?" "Touring." "Now, if you don't mind—" With one tentacle he filled out a form, while with another he gave me a form to sign, saying, "There's a wacker expected. It begins in a week. Therefore kindly go over to room 116. Our spares are made there. You'll be taken care of. Then proceed to room 67. That's the pharmaceutical booth. They'll give you your frugalium pills. Take one every 3 hours. It neutralizes the harmful effects on your organism of our planet's radioactivity. Will you be lighting up during your stay on Enopia?" "No, thanks." "As you like. Here are your papers. You are a mammal, I believe?" "That's right." "Well then, happy mammaling." Taking my leave of this courteous official, I went, as he had directed me, to the place where they made spares. The egg-shaped chamber appeared, at first glance, to be unoccupied. There were several electrical devices standing about, and on the ceiling a crystal lamp gleamed and sparkled. It turned out, however, that the lamp was an Ardrite, a technician on duty. He immediately climbed down from the ceiling. I sat on the chair. Diverting me with conversation, he took my measurements, then said, "Thank you, sir. We'll be transmitting your gemma to all the hectares on our planet. If anything should happen to you during a wacker, rest assured, we bring a spare at once." I wasn't all that clear about what he meant. However, in the course of my many travels, I have learned discretion, since there is nothing more unpleasant for the inhabitants of a planet than to have to explain their local ways and customs to a foreigner. At the pharmaceutical booth, another line, but it moved quickly, and before I knew it, a nimble Ardritis in a faience lampshade had handed me my pill ration. Then a brief formality at customs. I wasn't about to trust that electrical brain, and with visa in hand, I returned on board. Behind the moon begins an interspace throughway, well-maintained, with great billboards on either side. The individual letters are a few thousand miles apart, but at normal speed the words fall together so fast it's like having them printed in a newspaper. For a while I read these with interest, such as, "Hunters, for big game spread, try mill," or "Warm your cockles, bop octopuckles," and so on. It was 7 in the evening when I landed at the Ubadub airport. The blue sun had just gone down. In the rays of the red one, which was still quite high, everything seemed enveloped in flame, an unusual sight. A galactic cruiser majestically settled down beside my rocket. Beneath its fins, touching scenes of reunion were acted out. The Ardrites, separated for many long months, embraced one another with cries of joy, after which they all, fathers, mothers, children, tenderly clasped together in globes that shimmered pink in the light of the sun, hurried off to the exit. I followed after those harmoniously rolling families. Right in front of the airport there was a Molly stop, and I got on one. This conveyance, decorated on top with characters of gold that formed the sign, "Rouse Spread Hunts Best," looked something like a Swiss cheese. In its larger holes sat the grown-ups, while the smaller served to carry the little ones. As soon as I got on, the Molly pulled out. Enclosed in its crystal mass above me, below me, and all around, I saw the congenially translucent and multicolored silhouettes of my fellow passengers. I reached into my pocket for the Baedeker, feeling it was high time I acquainted myself with a few helpful facts, but discovered, to my dismay, that the volume I was holding dealt with the planet Enteroptica, a good 3 million light-years removed from my present location. The Baedeker I needed was at home, that damned absent-mindedness of mine. Well, I had no choice but to go to the Ubadub branch of the well-known astronautical travel bureau, Galax. The conductor was most courteous. When I asked him, he immediately stopped the Molly and pointed his tentacle at an enormous building, then saw me off with a friendly change of color. For a moment I stood still, delighting in the remarkable scene afforded by the city at dusk. The red sun was just then sinking beneath the horizon. Ardrites don't use artificial illumination. They themselves light up. The Meteor Boulevard, on which I stood, was filled with the glimmer of pedestrians. One young Ardritis, passing by, flirtatiously burst into golden stripes inside her shade, but then, evidently recognizing a foreigner, she modestly dimmed. Houses near and far sparkled and glowed with the inhabitants returning from work. Deep within the temples gleamed multitudes in prayer. Children raced up and down the stairs like crazy rainbows. It was all so captivating, so colorful, that I didn't want to leave, but had to before Galax closed for the night. In the lobby of the Travel Bureau, they directed me to the 23rd floor, the Provincial Division. Yes, it's sad, but nonetheless true. Our Earth is in the boondocks of the universe, obscure, ignored. The secretary I approached in the Tourist Service Department clouded over with embarrassment and said that Galax, unfortunately, had neither guidebooks nor sightseeing itineraries for Earthlings, since the latter came to Enopia no more than once a century. She offered me a booklet for Jovians, in view of the common solar origin of Earth and Jupiter. I took it, for lack of anything better, and requested a reservation at the Hotel Cosmonia. I also signed up the hunt organized by Galax, then went out into the city. My situation was all the more awkward in that I wasn't able to shine by myself. Thus, when I encountered at an intersection an Ardrite who was regulating traffic, I stopped and, in his light, skimmed through my new guidebook. As I might have expected, it furnished information about where one could obtain methane preserves, what to do with one's antennae at official functions, etc. So I chucked it in a trash can, caught a passing transom, and asked to be taken to the Gum Tower district. Those magnificent cup-shaped edifices, seen at a distance, glistened with the variegated glow of Ardrites devoting themselves to their family affairs, and in the office buildings the luminous necklaces of the officials coruscated in the loveliest way. Dismissing my transom, I wandered about on foot for a while. As I marveled at the porridge authority, a gum tower soaring high above the square, two important functionaries emerged from it. I could tell they were important by the intense glare and the red crests around their shades. They stopped nearby, and I overheard their conversation. "So, smearing the rims is out now," said the tall one, covered with medals. The other brightened at this and replied, "Yes. The director says we won't make quota, and it's all the fault of Grudruffs. There's no help for it, says the director. He'll have to be converted." "Grudruffs?" "Grudruffs." The first darkened, only his medals continued to twinkle in iridescent wreaths, and lowering his voice, he said, "He'll slooch, the poor devil." "He can slooch all he likes. Discipline has to be maintained. We've been transmuting the boys for years, and it isn't for the purpose of making more scrupts." Intrigued, I had edged closer to the two Ardrites without realizing it, and they moved away in silence. It was a funny thing, but after this incident the word scrupt seemed to crop up more and more frequently. The more I walked the streets, feeling the urge to immerse myself in the nightlife of the metropolis, the more from the throngs trundling past there drifted that enigmatic phrase, now uttered in a strangled whisper, and now in a passionate cry. One could see it, written on the poster globes that announced sales and auctions of rare scruptics, or emblazoned across the neon ads encouraging the purchase of the very latest scruptures. In vain did I ponder its meaning. Then finally, while I was sitting, around midnight, over a cold glass of Squamp milk in a bar on the 80th floor of a department store, and the Ardrite chanteuse had begun to sing the popular song, "That Little Scrupt of Mine," my curiosity reached such proportions that I asked a passing waiter where I might buy myself a scrupt. "Across the street," he answered mechanically, taking my check and money. Then he gave me a hard look and dimmed a little. "You're alone?" he asked. "Yes. What of it?" "Oh, nothing. I'm sorry, but I don't have change." I forwent the change and took an elevator down. Yes, directly opposite me I saw a gigantic sign for scrupts, so I pushed open the glass door and found myself inside a shop, empty at that late hour. I went over to the counter and, assuming an air of indifference, asked for a scrupt. "At which scruptrum?" inquired the salesman, coming down from his perch. "At which... let me see... at the usual," I replied. "What do you mean, at the usual?" he said with surprise. "We sell only certain scrupts." "Fine, I'll take one." "But where's your macket?" "Ah, yes. Didn't bring it with me." "Then how can you buy it without your wife?" said the salesman, staring at me. He was slowly darkening. "I'm not married," I blurted without thinking. "You're not married?" he gasped, ashen, looking at me with horror. You want a scrupt, and you're not married?" The salesman quivered all over. I got out of there as quickly as I could, flagged down an unoccupied transom, and, furious, asked to be taken to some popular night spot, which turned out to be the Murgendrag. When I entered, the orchestra had just stopped playing. There were well over 300 persons perched here. Looking about for an empty place, I was pushing through the crowd when suddenly someone called my name. With joy, I caught sight of a familiar face. It was a traveling salesman I'd met once on Eutropia. He was perching with his wife and daughter. I introduced myself to the ladies and began amusing my already merry companions with a little repartee. From time to time, they alighted and, to the rhythm of a lively dance tune, went rolling across the ballroom floor. Repeatedly urged by the spouse of my acquaintance, I finally got up the nerve to join in, and so, tightly embraced, the four of us rolled round and round to the music of a wild mamborina. To tell the truth, I got battered up a bit, but grinned and bore it, and pretended I was having a marvelous time. On the way back to our table, I pulled my acquaintance aside and asked him in a whisper about the scrupts. "Beg your pardon?" He hadn't heard me. I repeated my question, adding that I would like to acquire a scrupt. Apparently I had spoken too loud. Those perched nearby turned around and looked at me with murky faces, and my Ardrite friend threw up his tentacles in alarm. "For the love of Munch, Mr. Tichy, but you're alone." "And what if I am?" I snapped, irritated. "Is that any reason I can't see a scrupt?" There was a sickening silence. The wife of my acquaintance fell to the floor in a faint. He rushed to her assistance, and the nearest Ardrites started rolling towards me, their color betraying the most hostile intentions. At that moment 3 waiters appeared, seized me by the scruff of the neck, and tossed me out into the street. I was positively furious. I hailed a transom, took it back to the hotel. All that night I didn't sleep a wink. Something was gnawing, chafing at me. At daybreak I discovered that the hotel staff, having received no particulars from Galax and accustomed to guests who burned their mattresses clear through to the springs, had given me asbestos sheets. But the unpleasant incidents of the previous day seemed unimportant that bright morning. It was in the best of spirits that I greeted the Galax representative who came for me at 10 in a transom full of snares, jars of hunting spread, and a whole arsenal of sportsmen's weapons. "Ever hunted Squamp before?" asked my guide as the vehicle wove its way through the streets of Ubadub at breakneck speed. "No. Perhaps you would care to enlighten me," I said with a smile. My many years of experience on safaris for the largest game in the galaxy entitled me, I thought, to show no excitement. "Gladly," replied the courteous guide. There was a slender Ardrite of glassy complexion, without a shade, wrapped in a navy blue fabric. I had not seen that sort of dress before on the planet. When I told him this, he explained it was a hunting outfit, indispensable for stealing up on game. What I had taken for cloth was in fact a special substance with which one covered one's body. In short, a spray-on suit, comfortable, practical, and, most important, completely blotting out the natural effulgence of the Ardrites, which might scare off a Squamp. The guide pulled a leaflet from his handbag and gave it to me to study. I have it still among my papers. It reads, "Hunting Squamp, Instructions for Foreigners." The Squamp as a game animal places great demands on the personal accomplishments no less than on the gear of the hunter. Inasmuch as this beast has, in the course of evolution, adapted itself to meteoroid rains by developing an absolutely impervious integument of armor, Squamp are hunted from the inside only. To hunt a Squamp, one must have, A, in the preliminary phase, base spread, mushroom sauce, chives, salt, and pepper. B, in the phase proper, a whisk broom, a time bomb. 1. Preparation in the field. One hunts a Squamp with bait. The hunter, having besmeared himself beforehand with the base spread, crouches down in a furrow of the torg, after which his companions sprinkle finely chopped chives over him and season to taste. 2. In this position one awaits the Squamp. When the animal approaches, one should remain calm and with both hands take firm hold of the time bomb, gripped between one's knees. A hungry Squamp will usually swallow at once. If, however, the Squamp does balk, one may encourage it with a gentle slap across the tongue. When a miss seems likely, some advise additional salting. This, however, is a most hazardous move, for the Squamp may sneeze. Very few hunters have survived the sneeze of a Squamp. 3. A Squamp that takes the bait will lick its lips and walk away. Upon being swallowed, the hunter immediately proceeds to the active phase. That is, with the whisk broom he brushes from himself the chives and spices, so that the spread may freely work its purgative effect, whereupon he sets the time bomb and withdraws as quickly as possible in the direction opposite to that from which he came. 4. Upon leaving the Squamp, one should take care to land on one's hands and feet and not hurt oneself. Warning: the use of sharp spices is forbidden. Also forbidden is the planting of time bombs already set and sprinkled with chives. Such an act is considered poaching and will be prosecuted to the limit of the law. At the border of the game preserve we were met by the warden, Wacker, in the midst of his family that sparkled like crystal in the sun. He proved to be most friendly and hospitable. Invited to partake of some refreshment, we passed several hours at his charming estate, listening to true-life tales of Squamp and the hunting reminiscences of Wacker and his sons. Then suddenly a breathless courier came bursting in with the news that the beaters had flushed some Squamp from cover and into the heart of the bush. Squamp, explained the warden, must first be driven around a bit to get them good and hungry. Anointed with spread and holding my bomb and spices, I set off in the company of Wacker and my guide. We entered the torg. The path soon vanished in impenetrable thickets. Progress grew difficult. From time to time we came upon Squamp tracks, which were potholes 20 feet in diameter. On and on we went, interminably. Then the earth shook, and my guide halted, motioning silence with his tentacle. One could hear thunder, as if a violent storm were raging just over the horizon. "Hear that?" whispered the guide. "A Squamp?" Yes, it's a cub. Now we pushed ahead more slowly and with greater caution. The crashing died away, and the twog again was still. Finally, through the underbrush, there gleamed an open field. At the edge of it, my companions found a suitable spot, then seasoned me, and, making sure I had the whisk broom and bomb in readiness, left on tiptoe, recommending patience. For a while nothing disturbed the reigning silence but the whine and burr of octopuckles. My legs had grown quite numb when, suddenly, the ground began to tremble. I saw a movement in the distance. The treetops at the far end of the clearing swayed and fell, marking the path of the beast. This was Big One, all right. Presently the Squamp looked out on the field, stepped over some fallen trunks, and plodded forward. Swinging majestically from side to side, it headed straight in my direction, snuffing noisily. With both hands I clutched the jug-eared bomb and waited, perfectly calm. The Squamp stopped at a distance of some 150 feet from me and licked its lips. In its transparent interior I could clearly see the remains of many a hunter upon whom fortune had not smiled. For a while the Squamp thought it over. I began to fear the thing would go away, but then it approached and tasted me. I heard a hollow slurp and lost the ground from under my feet. Got him, I thought. Inside the Squamp it wasn't nearly as dark as it had seemed at first. Brushing myself off, I lifted the heavy time bomb and was just about to set it when someone went, ahem! I looked up, startled, and saw before me a strange Ardrite, also bending over a bomb. We stared at one another for a minute. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Hunting Squamp," he replied. "So am I," said. "But go ahead, you were here first." "Nonsense," he replied. "You are a visitor." "No, really," I protested. "I'll save my bomb for another time. Please don't let my presence hamper you." "I won't hear of it," he exclaimed. "You are our guest." "I am a hunter first." "And I a host, and will not have you give up this Squamp on my account. Make haste now, for the Sprit is beginning to work." In truth, the Squamp had become uneasy. Even in here its powerful panting reached us, with a sound like several dozen locomotives all going at once. Seeing that I would never persuade the Ardrite, I set the bomb and waited for my new companion. He, however, insisted I go first. Shortly thereafter, we left the Squamp. Falling from a height of 2 stories, I twisted my ankle a little. The Squamp, evidently much relieved, went charging off into the brush, snapping trees with an awful racket. Suddenly there was a terrific boom, then silence. "Well done, old fellow! Congratulations!" shouted the hunter, heartily shaking my hand. At that moment the game warden and my guide came up. It was getting dark. We had to hurry back. The warden promised that he himself would stuff the Squamp and have it sent to Earth on the very first freighter out. 5:11. Didn't write a word for 4 days. I was too busy. Every morning, those characters from the Commission for Cultural Cooperation with the Cosmos, museums, exhibits, radio activities, and in the afternoon, visits, official receptions, addresses. I'm all done in. The delegate from CCCC in charge of me said yesterday that we were due for a wacker, but I forgot to ask him what a wacker was. Supposed to see Professor Pook, the famous Ardrite scientist, but don't know when yet. 6:11. At the hotel early, wakened by an ungodly noise. I jumped out of bed and saw great columns of smoke and fire rising above the city. I phoned the information desk, asked what was happening. "It's nothing," said the operator. "Nothing to worry about, sir. Only a wacker." "A wacker?" "Yes, a wacker. A meteor shower. We get them once every 10 months. "But that's dreadful," I cried. "Shouldn't I go to a shelter?" "Oh, no shelter will withstand a striking meteor. But really, sir, you have a spare, like every citizen. There is no need to be afraid." "What do you mean, a spare?" I asked, but she had already hung up. I quickly dressed and went out into the city. The traffic in the streets was perfectly normal. Pedestrians hurried about their business. Dignitaries ablaze with iridescent medals drove to their offices, and in the parks played children, twinkling and singing. The explosions thinned out after a while. Only in the distance now could one still hear their steady rumble. A wacker, I thought, evidently was not a terribly serious phenomenon, if no one here paid the least attention to it. And so I went, as I had planned, to the zoological garden. I was shown around by the director himself, a slender, nervous Ardrite with a handsome shine. The Ubadub Zoo is well kept up. The director told me with pride that its collection contains animals from the farthermost reaches of the galaxy, including even an Earth exhibit. Touched, I asked to see it. "Unfortunately, you can't just now," he said, then added, when I looked at him questioningly, "It's their sleeping period. We had a great deal of trouble with the acclimatization, you see. For a while I was afraid we wouldn't be able to keep a single one of them alive, but happily the vitamin supplements our experts worked out gave excellent results." "Yes, but what sort of animal are they?" "Flies. By the way, do you like Squamp?" He threw me a peculiar searching look, so that I replied, trying to give my voice the sound of genuine enthusiasm, "Oh, I'm crazy about them. Wonderful creatures." He beamed. "Good. Let's go see them. But first, excuse me for a moment." He returned with a coil of rope and led me to the Squamp pen, which was encircled with a 300-foot wall. Opening the door, he had me enter first. "You can rest easy," he said. "My Squamp are perfectly tame." I found myself on an artificial torg field. There were 6 or 7 squamp grazing, splendid specimens, each measuring about 3 hectares across. The largest, at the voice of the director, approached us and held out its tail. The director climbed up on it, beckoning me to follow, so I did. When the angle grew too steep, he uncoiled his rope and gave me an end to tie around myself. Thus fastened, we climbed for more than 2 hours. At the summit of the squamp, the director sat down in silence, clearly moved. I said nothing, wishing to respect his feelings. After some time, he spoke. "A beautiful view from here, don't you think?" And indeed, we had at our feet nearly all of Ubadub, with its spires, temples, and gum towers. Along the streets milled the citizens, as small as ants. "You are fond of Squamp," I quietly remarked, seeing how the director gently stroked the back of the beast near its summit. "I love them," he said simply, turning to face me. "Squamp, after all, are the cradle of our civilization," he added. Then, after a moment's thought, he continued, "Once, many thousands of years ago, we had no cities, no magnificent homes, no technology, no spares. In those days, these gentle, mighty beings cared for us, brought us safely through the difficult periods of the whackers. Without Squamp, not a single Ardrite would have lived to see these present happy times. And now look how they are hunted down, destroyed, exterminated. What monstrous, black ingratitude." I dared not interrupt. It took him a moment to master his emotions, then he went on. "How I hate those hunters who return goodness with villainy. You have seen, I take it, the hunting advertisements, the signs?" "Yes." The director's words had made me thoroughly ashamed of myself, and I trembled at the thought that he might learn of my recent crime. I had, after all, hunted a squamp with my very own hands. Wishing to divert the director from this somewhat ticklish topic of conversation, I asked him, "You really owe them that much, then? I was not aware of this." "What? Not aware? But the squamp carried us in their wombs for 20,000 years. Living inside them, protected by their powerful armor against the hail of deadly meteors, our forefathers became what we are today, intelligent, beautiful beings that shine by night. And you were not aware of this?" "I am a foreigner," I muttered, vowing in my soul never, never again to raise a hand against a squamp. "Yes, of course," replied the director, no longer listening to me, and got to his feet. "Unfortunately, we must go back. I have my duties to attend to." From the zoological garden, I took a transom to Galax, where some tickets for a matinee were supposed to have been put aside for me. In the center of town, thundering explosions could again be heard, louder, with increasing frequency. Above the roofs rose columns of smoke, flickering with flames, but none of the pedestrians appeared to mind it in the least, so I kept silent. The transom stopped in front of Galax. The official on duty asked me how I had liked the zoo. "Yes, very nice," I said, "but good Lord!" All of Galax jumped. 2 office buildings across the way, clearly visible through the window, flew apart under the impact of a meteor. Deafened, I went reeling against a wall. "It's nothing," said the official. "You'll get used to it in time. Here are your tick—" He didn't finish. There was a flash, a crash, dust everywhere, and when it settled, instead of the person talking to me, I saw a giant hole in the floor. I stood there, petrified. Hardly a minute went by before several Ardrites in overalls patched the hole and wheeled up a dolly with a large bundle. When it was unwrapped, there before my eyes appeared the official, holding the tickets in his hand. He brushed the rest of the packing from himself, climbed onto his perch, and said, "Your tickets. I told you it was nothing. Each of us, in case of emergency, is replicated. You are surprised at our composure? Well, but this has been going on for a good 30,000 years. We have grown accustomed to it. If you would like some lunch, the Galax restaurant is now open, downstairs and to your left." "Thanks, I'm not hungry," I replied, and a little weak in the knees went out amidst the continual explosions and thunderclaps. Suddenly I was seized with anger. They won't see an earthling cower, I thought, and glancing at my watch, asked to be driven to the theater. Along the way, a meteor smashed the transom, so I got into another. At the place where yesterday the theater building had stood, there was now a smoking pile of rubble. "Will my money be refunded for these tickets?" I asked the cashier, who was standing in the street. "Certainly not. The show begins on schedule." "On schedule? But didn't a meteor just—" "We still have 20 minutes, said the cashier, pointing to his watch. "Yes, but—" "Would you mind not blocking the box office? We want to buy tickets," shouted some individuals in the line that had formed behind me. With a shrug, I stepped aside. 2 big machines, meanwhile, loaded the debris and carted it away. In a few minutes, the site was cleared. "Are they going to perform in the open air?" I asked one of those waiting. He was fanning himself with a program. "Nothing of the kind. I assume that everything will be as usual," he replied. I bit my lip, incensed, thinking he was trying to make a fool of me. An enormous tanker drove up to the site. From it was poured a doughy, cherry-red substance which formed a sizable blob. Immediately they inserted pipes into this pulpy, steaming mass and began pumping air inside it. The blob changed into a bubble that expanded with incredible speed. A minute later, it presented an exact copy of the theater building, except that it was completely soft, for it wobbled in the breeze. But in another 5 minutes, the newly inflated structure had hardened. Just then, a meteor shattered part of the ceiling. So a new ceiling was blown. Then the doors were flung open, and in thronged the spectators. Taking my seat, I noticed it was still warm. That was the only indication of the recent catastrophe. I asked a neighbor just what that substance was, which they had used to rebuild the theater, and found out. It's the famous Ardrite fab gum. The show began a minute late. At the sound of a gong, the house dimmed, resembling a gridiron full of dying coals, while the actors shone brilliantly. The play they did was symbolic and historical. To tell the truth, I didn't get much out of it, particularly as a number of things were conveyed by color pantomime. The first act took place in a temple. A group of young Ardritises crowned a statue of the Munge with flowers, singing about their betrotheds. Suddenly, an amber prelate appeared and drove away the maidens, with the exception of the most beautiful, who was as clear as spring water. Her, the prelate locked inside the statue. Imprisoned, she sang an aria summoning her beloved, who ran in and extinguished the old prelate. Just then a meteor pulverized the roof, part of the scenery, and the beautiful maiden. But from the prompter's box they immediately brought out a spare, and so adroitly that if you happened to have coughed or blinked your eyes, you wouldn't have noticed a thing. Following this, the lovers decided to raise a family. The act concluded with the rolling of the prelate off a cliff. When the curtain went up again after the intermission, I beheld an exquisite sphere of husband, wife, and progeny, swaying back and forth, to the sound of the music. A servant entered and announced that an unknown benefactor had sent the married couple a bouquet of scrupts. Then an enormous crate was wheeled on stage. I watched its opening with bated breath, but just as the lid was being lifted, something struck me violently in the forehead, and I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was seated in the very same place. Of the scrupts, there was no longer any mention in the scene. The extinguished prelate was now spinning about, sputtering the most dire imprecations at the tragically glowing children and parents. I clutched my head. There was no bump. "What happened to me?" I whispered to the lady at my side. "Pardon?" "Oh, a meteor got you. But you didn't miss a thing, believe me. That duet was absolutely awful." "Of course it was scandalous. They had to send all the way to Galax for your spare," whispered the pleasant Ardritis. "What spare?" I asked, suddenly feeling numb. "Why, yours, of course." "Then where am I?" "Where? Here in the theater. Are you all right?" "Then I am the spare?" "Certainly." "But where is the I that was sitting here before?" Those in front of us went shh, and my neighbor fell silent. "Please," I whispered, "you have to tell me. Where are the... You know what I mean." "Quiet. What is this? We're trying to hear." They were hissing from all sides now. The one behind me, orange with anger, began calling for the usher. More dead than alive, I fled the theater, took the first transom back to the hotel, and examined myself carefully in the mirror. My spirits revived a little, for there seemed to be no change. However, upon closer inspection, I made a terrifying discovery. My shirt was inside out, and the buttons were fastened all wrong. Clear proof that those who had dressed me didn't know the first thing about earth clothing. And on top of it all, I shook bits of packing out of my socks, left there in haste, no doubt. I could hardly breathe. Then the telephone rang. "This is the 4th time I've called," said the secretary from CCCC. "Professor Pook would like to see you today." "Who? Professor Pook?" I repeated, pulling myself together with the greatest effort. "Good. What time?" "At your convenience. Now, if you like." "I'll go to him at once," I suddenly decided. And please have my bill ready." "You're leaving?" asked the CCCC secretary, surprised. "Yes, I must. I'm not myself," I explained, and slammed the receiver on the hook. I changed and went downstairs. The recent events had affected me so much that when, just as I was getting into the transom, a meteor smashed the entire hotel to smithereens, I didn't even blink, but gave my driver the professor's address. The professor lived in an outlying district, among silvery hills. I stopped the transom fairly far from his house, glad for the chance to walk a little after the nervous tension of the last few hours. Proceeding along the road, I noticed a bent, elderly Ardrite who was slowly pushing a kind of wheelbarrow with a cover. He saluted me politely. I nodded in return. For a minute or so we walked together. Around the corner, a hedge came into view, bordering the home of the professor. On the other side, wisps of smoke were drifting up into the sky. The Ardrite walking next to me stumbled. Then from under the cover I heard a voice. "Now?" "Not yet," replied the carter. I was surprised at this, but said nothing. When we came to the fence, I stopped and stared at the smoke billowing from the spot where one would have expected the professor's house to be. The carter, when I brought this to his attention, nodded. "Right. A meteor fell, just about a quarter of an hour ago." "No," I exclaimed, horrified. "How dreadful!" "The gum mixer will be here any minute," said the carter. "It's the suburbs, you understand. They're never in a hurry, not for us." "Now?" came that scratchy voice again from inside the wheelbarrow. "Not yet," said the carter, and turned to me. "Would you mind opening the gate?" I obliged and asked, "You're going to the professor, too?" "Right, delivering a spare," said the carter as he set about lifting the cover. I held my breath upon seeing a large package carefully wrapped and tied. In one place the paper was torn. A living eye peered out. "Ah, you've come to see me, rasped the ancient voice within the package. "Be right with you. Right with you. Please, wait in the gazebo." "Yes, Fine," I answered. But as the carter wheeled his burden on ahead, I turned around, leaped over the fence, and ran as fast as I possibly